Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone in the Libertarian Institute. Today I am joined by the co-founder of the American Capitalist Party, Mark Pellegrino. Mr. Pellegrino, where is the best place for people to find information on this organization?
Well, they can go to my Twitter page. I'm very active on Twitter at Mark R. Pellegrino, and it is on my profile. And all they have to do is look at my profile, click on it, and they will see the entire platform before them.
I want to walk through some of the policies and planks here. You mentioned the separation of economy and state. What does that mean? Why is it important?
It's important for the same reasons that the separation of church and state is important. Your conscience should not be the business of the state, and the state shouldn't interfere with your conscience any more than it should interfere with your property. The property is the means by which you implement your life. It's the means by which you implement your right to life. So it's inseparable. Your conscience and your property are inseparable from living, and so the state should have no place in regulating that.
But in this sort of freedom, this dog-eat-dog world, the vulnerable will be taken advantage of. What would stop someone in this sort of capitalist society from taking advantage of the poor and vulnerable?
Well, a capitalist society isn't a society without laws, and it's not a society without governing principles. And you aren't allowed to defraud somebody or use force against somebody in a capitalist society. That's precisely what the government structure is set up to do, is to protect and defend those people. With respect to the claims that regulation somehow protects those who cannot, in some respects, look after their own welfare, I think that business would be privatized by private information orgs, and you would be responsible, of course, for doing your due diligence and looking after yourself and caretaking for yourself and perusing these private orgs that would give you information with respect to companies. And I think a company's reputation for safety and integrity would be a selling point in any market. So I think that would be an additional protection to people who are vulnerable.
That has been one of the most interesting things I found in this field is the amount of professional certifications that are available. You find it in baseball cards. You find it with getting people stamp of approval before they're hired, before they get this or that certification to work at another place, places like Underwriters Laboratory. It's like this thing is all around us all the time that we don't stop to sort of analyze. Oh yeah, it's everyone having standards every time we choose to buy and not buy something. That's us constantly regulating our surroundings. Why do you think people have been, let's say, swindled into the idea that only the state could have standards, which they could then impose? It's impossible for Mark Pellegrino to have standards and decide what to voluntarily associate with. We need some higher authority.
I think it's a jaundiced view of humanity, and I'm not in any way crossing over into the naive territory that all human beings are good, but I certainly don't treat them as if they're inherently evil. But I think that's been the premise of our culture, and not just our culture, but multiple cultures for millennia. And I don't think it can be overlooked that the people who have written the history of the United States and particularly the history of industrialization and capitalism were statists. They had empathy for socialism and the ideals of socialism, and they looked at capitalism and the Industrial Revolution through the lens of socialism. Capitalism itself is the name itself is an invention of Marx. So I think we were taking quite a risk at using that name instead of reforming that title. We used Marx's name, but in the same way that Rand uses the term selfishness and tries to redefine it for a culture that looks at it in a bad way.
And you summarize it very clear on your site. By the way, thank you for having a productive website where your policies are actually listed. Can't tell you how many of these places I go to, and it's nonsense. Justin Amash actually did that. It was terribly embarrassing. You say explicitly, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of economic regulations or restricting the free exercise of voluntary production and trade. So clear, so concise. Check out the American Capitalist Party. Links in the description below. What is the most important thing you learned from the works of Ayn Rand?
Wow, I mean that's an enormous question because her work was transformative for me. I think the main thing that you can take away from Rand is the vital importance of philosophy in life, in every aspect of life. And the reason we see the culture going off the rails is a denial of that fact, that human beings need philosophy. They need a view of the world, a conceptual grasp of their relationship to the world and what they should do about it. And those are the kinds of answers that philosophy supplies for us. Unfortunately, it's gone off into terrible directions, either radical skepticism, where you can't know anything and certainty is an anathema, or it's become a parlor game where it's a just rationalism for its own sake, and people creating mind problems to take up time in the classroom, but none of it's relatable to your life. But in fact, philosophy is vital to your life.
So if I read the works of Ayn Rand, how is that going to change me? How is that going to change my general outlook? Or assume you're dealing with someone who's, very favorable, open to learning new things. How can people benefit today? Not just, well, I could read it and then share it with others. How can people benefit from reading the works of Ayn Rand?
Well, I think it'll enable them to see well, this is a very complex question, believe it or not. I'll try to do it sort of standing on one foot, but it's hard. Like I said, you benefit because you understand the vital importance of philosophy in your life. It gives you a worldview. And what is a worldview? It's a worldview consists of a metaphysics, what is out there, of an epistemology, how do I know what's out there, and an ethics, what do I do about what's out there? And I think Rand answers those questions in a clear and concise way that's accessible to anybody who has a even moderate facility for language. And that's I think that's my I hope I've made a distinction beyond my previous one.
Absolutely, yeah. Much like you would need a compass in a forest, a philosophy gives you a guide to life. I know I'm interviewing you here, but I just have to share my favorite thing I learned from Ayn Rand. So this is, I want to say it's in the final chapter of The Virtue of Selfishness. It's a chapter titled The Argument from Intimidation, saying, there's a certain type of argument, which in fact is not an argument, but a means of forestalling debate and extorting an opponent's agreement with one's undiscussed notions. The essential characteristic of the argument from intimidation is its appeal to the moral self-doubt and its reliance on the fear, guilt, or ignorance of the victim. So what she's saying is, instead of people making points, what they'll do is they will display disapproval. Oh gosh, Mark, you don't actually still believe in capitalism, don't you? Didn't you hear about Andrew Carnegie? Well, wow, I can't even talk to you. It's this sort of disapproval that people show as a means of forestalling debate. They'll spend 10 minutes explaining to you why they can't explain to you why they're wrong. Once she pointed that out, I saw it everywhere. Republicans, Democrats,
Yeah.
people on my own side. Argument from intimidation was so vitally important. What does Rand mean when she says she is an advocate of selfishness? And what do you guys mean in general? You don't have to, necessarily parrot her, but what do you mean when you think selfishness is an asset, not a liability?
Well, it just means that you're holding yourself as your primary value, but that includes tons of things. Your universe, a person's universe, is not atomized the way people who hate selfishness would like to make us think. My values include family, loved ones, friends. It's a big web, a network of folks whose well-being is important to me. And working for my values in part means working with them and for them and making their lives better along with me. So all selfishness means is my values are important. I prioritize my values above everything else. It holds it because it under that perspective, which is, I think, stated another way, is called individualism. Is that it's the individual who's the primary mover and the primary thinker and the primary actor for his own life, and can only justifiably be the mover and actor and thinker for his own life.
And when it comes to criticisms of individualism, you might hear, look, Mark, you're engaged in a performative contradiction. You just used the English language to tell me something about yourself, but you didn't invent the English language. Other people did. You didn't build the house you're sitting in. You didn't write all those books behind you. We, the collective, are constantly working to benefit people like you, yet you want to reap all these benefits and then isolate yourself, calling yourself an individual. You are the result of a community, not an individual. What, if anything, is wrong with that mindset?
Well, I mean, it denies some practical things about society. One, that we've invented a thing that makes life incredibly easy for all of us, and that's called a division of labor. And the division of labor enables us all to focus on the things that we want to focus on. It frees us up from labor that would otherwise waste a lot of time and prevent us from innovating and becoming better. And it also avoids the concept of a trader society, right? A society that operates on exchange, where each and every individual is a productive being exchanging their production with other people's production, and we do it with the certificate of production that we call a dollar. And that's, but that nonetheless represents we've done something, of value. We've created a value, and now we're exchanging it for other values with people. And that's the beauty of society, is that as a group of individuals, we can protect one another and build greater knowledge and have greater innovation as a result of this thing that we call society. But it's not a singular mechanism. It's not a singular biological mechanism. It doesn't have any moral force. It's just a tool that enables each and every individual to thrive much better.
I don't know how it got out that we are just about people being, Robinson Crusoe all alone on an island. Even on your website, Congress shall make no law restricting the free exercise of voluntary production and trade. What do they think we mean? People trading with themselves? Like I take it from my right hand and give it to my left hand? No, it's people constantly cooperating within a society. So I hope that lie will someday die. I can't wait for it because there's no evidence that.
But if you come from the premise that individuals are inherently not just flawed, but and prone to error, but evil, and that if they will intentionally create a product that will harm somebody else for their own short-term gain, and that defines the human being. It's not the exception to the rule; it is the rule. Then you're going to want overseers whose motivating force is the common good, to oversee these unfortunate tendencies of humanity, restrain them as much as possible in the interest of the common good. And that has purchased in society, in part because it's just been told to us for so long. And our way of looking at the world is a little bit alien. It just doesn't have as much purchase yet, but hopefully that'll change.
And that, again, is what's so beneficial about Rand's philosophy, her ability to take principles and apply them consistently. Why should you have separation of church and state? What if someone believes the wrong religion? Well, she can walk through that it's still people who, at the end of the day, get to make the final call. You can persuade them. You can go door to door. You can hand out Bibles. You, Mark Pellegrino, get the final say. Atheist, Muslim, Jewish, conservative, whatever you want. So, by having this ability to see things consistently, you could even say, you know what? I think people can be kind of greedy. So I want to make sure that we have a marketplace where you could disassociate with greedy people. We can't have government coercively imposing because people are greedy. So we need competitors that we can choose from. So even if you take their criticisms of us, they sometimes apply to us, but they apply many times over to the government, who it's so difficult to opt out of. Just try getting your kid to not go to the local school. The amount of paperwork and truancy laws violations that you're up against, that people like Kamala Harris have been supporting for so long, make it near impossible. I should have asked this at the beginning. Rand always stressed the importance of defining your terms. When you mean government, capitalism, and socialism, what do you mean?
Government is a repository for objective law. Its purpose is to protect property and rights. Capitalism is a system based on liberty and the ownership of private property and the means of production. And socialism is the cancellation of the previous two. It's the use of government compulsion to universalize ownership of the means of production through government mediaries, of course. And so the first is an instrument to protect rights. Capitalism is the defensive and protection of rights in practice, and socialism is the destruction of all those.
So let's say I really find this philosophy intriguing. However, I really care about the environment. Why should I, a radical environmentalist who really believes that with no planet, there's no people for us to even have this discussion? So the environment is my top priority. Why should I care about the American Capitalist Party?
Well, I doubt you will. If the environment is your top priority, it's usually at the expense of human life, because human beings have to interact with and radically change their environments in order to make it habitable for human life. That said, I would say to an environmentalist, look, if you want to protect resources, the best way to do it is through a capitalist society, because it's the price mechanism, when it's left free to function, that literally guarantees you will never ever run out of a resource. Once it becomes too expensive to mine or to produce in some way, innovation, free enterprise will take it somewhere else and develop a new resource. And you can see this across the board with so many things. I mean, even from fossil fuels to nuclear power. If nuclear power wasn't criminalized the way it's been criminalized and made exponentially more expensive by the government, we would have gone from a source of power that's accessible and cheap but has certain externalities that are negative, to something that has almost no negative externalities and is just as dense, just as storable, if not more so, and even more powerful. And then that could have evolved into something even greater. So free markets enable you to do that through the price system. They conserve resources, and we've seen that in the reforestation of America and the reforestation of Europe now. That's coming about because of wealth. It's coming about because we don't have to rely on those raw resources now, because they've been replaced by other technology. Additionally, in a free society, if you believed in just raw, untouched nature, you could buy it, right? I mean, the environmental industry is a $9 billion a year industry. You mean to tell me they can't purchase land and then hold it and continue their donations to maintain it in the way that they think is appropriate? That would violate nobody's rights whatsoever. So I would say that would be my appeal to the environmentalists, even though I think environmentalists are so anti-life. It's not so much environmentalism as it is anti-humanism.
Yeah, I've always wondered that. There's like, what, billions of leftists on the planet. How much would they have to chip in? They wouldn't even have to move. They can use PayPal, Venmo, GoFundMe. PayPal is a big progressive organization, so they might even give you a discount. They can use Indiegogo for all this stuff. But it's like, even though the federal government in America alone gets like $4 trillion a year it spends, it's never enough. They're always like, with just $1 billion, we could fund A, B, and C. As if the treasury's like been completely empty and they've never done any of this before. say that I just want the average person who is poor or lower middle class to have a fighting chance. I see the American dream as someone working hard and achieving income mobility and having a larger income later in life. Why should I support the American Capitalist Party if I want people to have income mobility and a real increase in wages over time?
Well, first of all, the system that we live in now requires onerous certification rules that make it impossible for some people who are quite competent at what they do to move up. I'll give you an example. It's anecdotal, but my stepdaughter wanted to get braids in her hair, so she went to a neighbor who doesn't have the money to be certified in a salon, which I think costs a few $1,000s, and got the braids and paid her cash, and it was a perfectly done professional job. So in a free market, you wouldn't have these regulations that eat up capital and require you to be, somewhat flush with capital before you can move up the economic ladder. You could start at whatever rate your labor is worth and build your way up according to your talents and energy to heights that there are no ceiling for. So at the moment, the regulatory state inhibits growth. The wage price controls lock people out of the market. Unions with out of work. So all of those political apparatus would be eliminated, so that the market, the price of labor would be, what two people are able to negotiate with each other based on, what the competition is, what the supply and demand of labor is out there.
So Thomas Sowell has actually put this to the test. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. He found two interesting studies, one from the University of Michigan, finding that among working Americans who were in the bottom 20% of income in 1975, 95% had risen out of that bracket by 1991. 29% reached the top quintile by 1991. He also cites the IRS. Between 1996 and 2005, the income of individuals who had been in the bottom 20% of tax filers in 1996 had increased by 91% by 2005. How has such a lie been perpetrated that the poor just get poorer under capitalism when, first of all, there's no visual evidence of this that we'd run into? Second of all the empirical evidence is against them, yet everyone believes this lie. Any idea how they've perpetrated it and how we can combat it?
Yeah, I think socialism has a sexy narrative to people. It's romantic. It has conflict. Two sides engaged in a struggle for survival against each other. Stats are great, but they're not sexy. They're not very interesting. When you talk about these kinds of percentages, these people in particular slots in the wealth world, it's hard to get people to see that none of those numbers are static, right? It's like the people are moving in between those numbers all the time. In my 20s, I was poor. I'm not now. I could be in the future again, and then go back into wealth. It's in fact, some of the transitions from wealth to poor and back again are even quicker, and people are transitioning out of wealth even faster, right? I mean, so that 1% isn't a stable number. It's not something that just stays there, and the 99% just stays there. It's like you were saying, a relatively free market, or especially a really free market, gives you economic mobility. That's the important thing, not inequality, not economic inequality. Economic mobility is what matters.
One of my favorite ways of refuting this narrative, I forget who said this, but he goes, one day a man went to a high school and he found that one quarter of the students were freshmen and another quarter were seniors. He came back to the high school 20 years later and found that there were still one quarter freshmen and one quarter seniors. No one at this high school made progress in 20 years. What? No. These are the same quintiles with different people. Yet Paul Krugman thinks he's making a good point when he talks about these quintiles as if it's literally the same person who got an entry-level job at 16 and then turned 26, 36, 46, and
Yep.
just and nothing's happened.
It,
Everyone's just chessboard pieces.
but if Krugman says anything else, he won't get invited to the cocktail parties in Washington, D.C.
When socialism is frequently advocated, it's just about helping people. We see these people in need. They're very vulnerable. Don't bug me with your philosophy and your statistics. I just care about helping these people in need. Why should I support the American Capitalist Party if I genuinely feel for people in vulnerable situations?
Because liberty is the only thing that helps people out of vulnerable situations. You don't endow the government with the capacity to initiate force against people and rob them or redistribute their wealth. And you can't make the claim simultaneously that you're advocating for a safe society in which people can grow and develop and move up an economic ladder. You're really advocating for society based on compulsion and force. You just like the fact that the gun is being pointed at a rich guy you don't like, but you know the crime is the same. So for me, you know, what enables the poor more than anything is a liberalized society where these people who happen to be the primary victims of force in the neighborhoods that they live in are less susceptible to it. And the government should be protecting them from bad guys, not manipulating wage prices and throwing regulatory obstacles in their way to keep them down.
What evidence or reasoning do you have to believe that charities would exist in a capitalist society?
Well, because they existed before we had all this onerous regulation, and you know, the poverty rate was very, I mean, small in comparison to what it is today, and the dependency on charity was small in comparison to what it is today. And when you think about the time when Franklin Delano Roosevelt attempted to pass off Social Security as an insurance policy, not as an entitlement, it was met with a great deal of disdain on the part of the population. They didn't want handouts. They didn't want something for nothing. And so that's why he had to sell it as an insurance policy that they earned through their income as opposed to a handout from the government. And so there was that overall sense in the American psyche that working for and earning your living was a noble thing. It was a good thing.
Three of the biggest hurdles to really getting your life started and being financially secure, both in reality and just mentally, because a lot of the stress can really get to you, is the price of college, housing, and healthcare. We see a drastic decrease in computers, microphones, routers, printers, iPads, drinks, clothes, all this other stuff. We see a significant increase in those three things. Why is that? Do you have a general theory?
Well, it's not rocket science. It's the government has created demand by offering these things for free. So, you know, the demand is going to increase exponentially, and that's going to drive up costs. That's sort of the way things work. So the solution is to get government out of messing with the prices and the delivery of healthcare, stop messing with the prices and delivery of insurance, get out of education entirely. Remember, we don't want them in our heads. We don't want the state manipulating our consciences. And once universities and schools are subject to market evaluations of people like you and me deciding where to send our kids to school, we'll see a lot of things straighten up. Not only will the prices fall, and let's face it, that kind of freedom will also enable all kinds of technical innovations. I mean, as it is with all this state monopolization of education, you know, I can learn a language by 4 different apps and I can be pretty fluent in it in a year for about $100 a year. I could take, you know, great courses from some of the best professors in the world for $100 in Russian literature, government, the Constitution. It's all there. College level education for practically nothing on the internet, lectures and podcasts from professors. I can learn so much for a dime. And that would be even more prevalent. It would saturate the system to a degree where the brick and mortar school might be a passe thing. I personally don't think kids need to go to school to be socialized. I think that's a myth perpetuated by these establishment freaks that really do think education is about socialization. There's tons of ways that kids can interact with each other that don't have anything to do with learning. Learning isn't a matter of consensus anyway. It's about learning to think independently and evaluate reality properly. That's what learning is. So it's no mistake that all these fields in which the government is interfering with the prices become more expensive. It's time to get them out.
One of the shortcomings that is constantly thrown at us is to say, look, I like these ideas, but they don't really give me anything to sink my teeth into. It's like, all right, people should be free to do what they want, but I want to know what you guys have to say about starting a family. This was Ben Shapiro's recent criticism with the guy who's getting interviewed by him. He goes, well, when it comes to starting a family, being a good father, being a member of your community, being a cultural icon and an influence, and really getting to know people on a personal level, the freedom advocates, the Randians, don't have anything to say on this. Hey, first of all, that's a lie. Second of all, how do you respond to that mindset that you can't just tell me not to initiate aggression against peaceful people? You have to tell me what to do and give my life meaning and purpose. How do you attract those people to the American Capitalist Party?
I just think the most benevolent society in the world is the individualist society. It's the one that doesn't put those kinds of social obligations on people. I don't want to say obligation. Obligation is freely chosen. Social duties on people. A duty is something you have no choice about, and that I think that's morally that's a morally degenerative way of looking at the world. Individualism makes the claim that every person is sovereign. They are not ruled by anyone. They can't be ruled by anyone. They are their own the captain of their own destinies, and that's an extremely psychologically empowering place to be. It's a positive place to be, and it excites benevolence towards your fellow sovereign being. It doesn't excite atomization or being closed off in any way. That's why America, even to the extent that we're controlled today, we have that sense of life, and that makes us the most generous nation in the world. When your brother isn't getting his nourishment off the skin of your back, but you're two independent producers exchanging with each other, persuading one another. That's the essence of the dignity of a human being, and that creates a really positive social milieu.
When it comes to things like mutual aid societies, I think there's a really big opening for us to start using these in place of state welfare systems. Are there any charities that really grab your attention that you think we could start immediately right now, trying to disassociate from the state, using them as sort of the alleged safety net for the rest of us? Do you have any favorite mutual aid societies or charities that you keep your eye on?
I mean, I tend to go for charities that help sick children, like St. Jude's is one of my favorite charities. As for other organizations, the problems that people have with these organizations today is that they would demand conditions. And, people don't like conditions. I remember going down to the Mission downtown Los Angeles and talking to a bunch of homeless people. And one of the homeless people said, there's plenty of resources here. Everybody who's out on the street actually could have, a bed to sleep in and hot food tonight if they wanted to, because there's churches that would take them in. There are private organizations and some publicly funded ones. They don't want to because that room, that bed, and that meal comes with the stipulation that they have to be sober or they have to be in by a certain time, and people don't want to be bound by that. So there's going to be that issue, that will cause some philanthropists out there to cringe, that putting stipulations on people for charity doesn't make them feel like it's real charity then, but it is.
God forbid you have standards for anyone.
Right.
Only politicians can have standards for us.
And here's another example of how the politicians. This is another anecdotal example of how politicians get in the way of real charity. My old boxing coach, every Sunday, he's a great cook, would cook up this massive feast. He'd go down to Santa Monica, and he was in a park, and he would feed the homeless. And they were lining up 100, 200 homeless people would get a great meal from him. And he did this every Sunday until he was kicked out by the politicians who claimed he couldn't do that. He needed some form of certification. Of course,
happened in Arizona too.
Which just means you got to pay a bureaucrat a few hundred, but bribe a bureaucrat, and then you can do something kind for another person. He moved around a bunch of times and finally settled in the parking lot of a church that would let him do it. And he still got in trouble feeding 100, 200 homeless people on a weekend. And I would go in the chow line with him and help him, dish out the food. Totally benevolent, but prevented from doing it by the government.
Yeah, in Arizona, they refer to it as unlicensed food distribution. So it was like the Upton Sinclair logic of why you can't help anyone today.
And there you have another example of that, that licensing and certification thing that holds people back from either moving up economically or getting the help that they need from people.
One of the most impressive pieces of imagery or art, can we call it, was this painting of, who was it? It was Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, Bernie Sanders, and AOC. And it was all of them being painted, sort of showing you that there's been this historical progression, that now you are part of this long history of people and helping the workers of the world unite. How can we as freedom advocates develop sort of a historical narrative to give people meaning and really get them to understand and appreciate the history and value of these ideas?
Yeah, now that is the question, because when you can do that, I think you can capture the culture the way the left has. I mean, we can hate Marxism and see it for the depraved philosophy that it is, and how it comes from hatred for pretty much everything. But it has a narrative that's filled with conflict and mythology, and people gravitate towards that. Now, you could say, authors like Ayn Rand and Heinlein, wrote into their work, I think, narratives that really promote liberty in a really great way. Rand a little bit more didactically, in the case of Atlas Shrugged. But yes, we need those narratives. We need more of those narratives. I'm trying to do that in my own small way, creating reality checks and also fiction, films, writing films that I think will hopefully begin to establish this idea that liberty is good in the subconscious of our culture. But it's going to take a long time.
What I really like about Ayn Rand, and what's so often unappreciated, is she had no problem saying there are a lot of rich people who will use the state to coerce others into acting, and this is unjustifiable. So the idea that, well, she was just some woman who got over here and tried to close the door behind her and suck up to all the rich people, it's not even close. So what I got from the works of Rand was, it's not rich versus poor, black versus white, men versus women, America versus Russia. It's people who achieve their ends peacefully through persuasion and value for value exchanges versus violence advocates. Do you think there's some sort of dichotomy, some sort of bumper sticker we could at least have as a starting point, whether it's violence advocates versus voluntarists, whether it's capitalists versus coercivists, anything come to mind as a starting point where we could sort of start our own narrative with determining who is a good person in society and what it means to be a bad person?
You mean come up with a bumper sticker like "Hope and Change" or "Make America Great Again," something like
Or
that?
Fight for 15 or No Fly, No Buy, something like that. We got to we got to start playing on that field because as much as I love Atlas Shrugged, it's difficult to pass to a family member and have them say, "Oh, I'll be right back. Hold on."
Yes, that's true, and
Yeah.
you're right. We have to start thinking in digestible concepts like that. And I haven't thought about sound bites like that could serve as the appetizer for the meal of liberty. I'll have to think more about that.
What is one book you would recommend that people read? If you recommend 10 books, no one's going to read any of them. If you say this is one book that I would like everyone to read, what would that book be and why?
Wow. I would say Leonard Peikoff's book, Objectivism, The Philosophy of Ayn Rand. I think because he takes the broad brushstrokes that she wrote in Objectivist Epistemology and elaborates on them in a way that's accessible to lots of people. Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology is a dry philosophy book that won't appeal to everybody, but Peikoff has a great writing style. And I think his elaborations clarify a lot of her broader points, and it makes that philosophy very accessible. So I would say that would be the one book I would think that somebody should read if they wanted an overview of a philosophy that can help them grasp the way things are.
What is the best part about being an actor?
I get to play for a living. So I get to be an eternal 6-year-old, and that's fun. That's fun. And
Who have
it puts bread and onions on the table.
It does. So from what I've heard, it does. It either really does or it really doesn't.
Right.
From what I've heard,
Right.
who have been some of your favorite actors to work with?
Oh wow. Philip Seymour Hoffman was one of my favorites. I felt like in many ways we were like souls. My wife would read an interview from him and say, "Oh my God, you guys sound exactly alike." And I really felt. I mean, I think he had a much sadder sense of life, and mine was far more optimistic. But we thought about acting in the same way, and he was very, very generous, and very talented, and I really miss him quite a bit when I think about how tragic his death was. I loved working with Jeff Bridges. Now when he did The Big Lebowski, of course he'd had a long career and had been recognized, but I thought at that time still very underrated as an actor. He's a genius in his own way. He's a perfect combination of spontaneity. What we in the acting world emulate this idea of spontaneity and technical prowess. So he's aware of all of this technical stuff that actors don't like to be aware of without sacrificing his humanity, moment to moment humanity. And I thought it was brilliant. I learned from him that it was okay to watch video playback of a scene you just did, and then go back and make adjustments on your own, because you can't tell when you're in the moment what's working, what isn't. You may think the scene is great, and then you look at it on the monitor and say, that didn't come off the way I thought it should. I need to go back and take another swing at it. I've loved working with Jeff Goldblum. I had a fairly collaborative relationship with him for a few years in the 90s when he directed a short film for Chanticleer Productions called Little Surprises that me and a group of other actors at Playhouse wrote basically through improvisations, and then got it produced, and it was nominated for an Academy Award. And then he would every time he would do a play on Broadway or the West End, anywhere in the world, he would bring the play back to the Playhouse West, where I was a teacher and a student, and where he was a teacher as well. And we would put the play up. We would practice the play and do it there at Playhouse West. We did it with The Exonerated, and we did it with Speed the Plow, because he was going to go on a world tour of Speed the Plow with Kevin Spacey before that went south. And so he was, keeping tuned up. So you could say that I was Jeff's sparring partner a lot, keeping him tuned up for the big shows, and that was really fun. Yeah, and I've been fortunate. Jim Carrey, I thought, was amazing. I thought he was, I'm not sure if he had done Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind at the time that I did the number 23 with him. But he's known as a big, hammy comedic actor who's very talented and committed. And then you see this other part of him that's just so focused and intent and sensitive and emotional and deep. And it's real. I mean, the guy has got a very deep well. I loved working with him, and I loved watching how focused he was. It was really, really quite impressive. I mean, I could go on I've been fortunate, to work with people who have been very good at what they do, and also good to me. I became friends with Rod Steiger, the great actor Rod Steiger, for a while before he passed away. He played my father in that short film, and I traveled the world with him. He took me to Europe for the first time. And I'd talk to him about acting, and, what was that scene like with you and Brando in the taxi cab and on the waterfront? Let's talk about. So I got it from him, from the horse's mouth, what it was like working with Marlon Brando, one of my favorite actors of all time. So yeah, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great people, great directors too.
And final question, Mr. Pellegrino, thank you so much for your time. The website is the American Capitalist Party. Link will be in the description below. What differentiates a good actor from a bad actor? What are some criterias you look for that you would determine this puts them in the good actor category, this puts them in the bad actor category?
I think good actors surprise you. You will look at the choices that they make, which are oftentimes just spontaneous and out of the moment, out of their intuitive grasp of what's happening, and it shocks you. And you think, wow, would I have understood that moment in that way to produce that kind of thing? I remember Gene Hackman saying that when he was first offered One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and then it was given to Jack Nicholson. And when he saw the performance, he's like, I just don't think I would have had those ideas. And so good acting surprises you. Good acting is visceral. It's intensely engaged, emotionally intensely engaged. I've always defined acting as passionate valuing. So it's sort of my mixture of objectivism and acting, which in most schools is not taught in a very objectivist format. But passionate valuing, going for what you want with all of yourself, and fighting obstacles along the way with complete engagement, and that's what produces, the kind of unpredictability you see in great actors like Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Hardy, the Pacino, when Pacino was at the top of his game, you just never knew what was going to happen from one minute to the next. And that's great. And bad acting is it's heady. It's thought out. It's programmed. It's not present. It's not in the moment. It's blocked. It's impersonal, it's faked, it's pushed, it's trying to achieve an idea as opposed to living in the moment. And you can see the difference. You can tell those differences.
Well, I once debated a Marxist professor and acted like I was interested for over 90 minutes. So I'm going to have you watch that and write a review and tell me if I'm a good actor or not.
Okay.
The website is AmericanCapitalistParty.org. Link in the description below. Thanks to everyone for watching Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute. Mr. Pellegrino, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.